Every moment of self-compassion is a moment of being awake at some level. Every moment of self-compassion is a moment of letting go of our identification with that small, separate, limited, inadequate self and moving into something bigger, more connected, and more heartful, full of love.
Welcome, friends, to this special episode of Insights at the Edge, where we're going to be exploring deepening our self-compassion. I'm here with two women who have dedicated a large portion of their professional life to exploring this topic and who teach together on deepening self-compassion. I'm here with Kristin Neff and Caverly Morgan. Let me tell you a little bit more about them. 20 years ago, Kristin Neff was the first researcher to empirically examine and measure self-compassion. She's an associate professor in the educational psychology department at the University of Texas at Austin. She's the author of the books Self-Compassion and a book called Fierce Self-Compassion: How Women Can Harness Kindness to Speak Up, Claim Their Power, and Thrive. She's joined by Caverly Morgan, who after 8 years as a Zen monk, discovered something unexpected. Nothing was missing. The freedom she'd been searching for was already here. Caverly Morgan is a teacher of awakening and the author of The Heart of Who We Are and a kid's book about mindfulness. She's also the founder of the nonprofit Peace in Schools, which brings mindfulness training to public high schools in the United States. And Caverly has a gift for pioneering ways that communities can awaken collectively. I'm so happy to be with both of you talking about a topic that is dearly important to me and I think to many Insights at the Edge listeners. Welcome.
Tami, thank you so
happy
much.
to be here. Yeah.
It's such an
Okay,
honor.
here at the beginning, let's give the origin story, how the two of you came to know each other and decide to teach together on this topic.
Should I start, Caverly?
Sure. Because Kristin, you'll probably
Well-
leave out the fangirl part of the story. I can always insert that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, apparently we met. Okay, you start.
Okay, so I'll
when
start.
we
So
met, and I don't
I-
remember.
Kristin does not remember that the first time we met, we were at a Bridging Hearts, Bridging Mind conference. I was there to represent Peace in Schools, which was a budding nonprofit at that time. And I was so impressed by Kristin's presentation. And so I was one of the many people in line afterwards to say, oh, you need to know about Peace in Schools. Oh my gosh, your research, it's incredible. So fast forward after that, that was our first meeting, but we consider our official first meeting a bit later. So Kristin, back to you.
Yeah. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I started getting interested in a type of meditation, which is generally known as, non-dual meditation, which is what Caverly teaches. And she was at this retreat. She wasn't teaching. She was there as a student. And the teacher had said, you got to meet Caverly. You two have so much in common. And when we met, you've ever had that feeling? It's like sisters separated at birth. We had so much in common, both in terms of our personality. I think we're both founders. She founded Peace in Schools. I founded the Self-Compassion Research. We both have a lot of fierceness. But what we really bonded over, I have to be honest, was, I'm not going to say who was teaching the retreat, but there were some unconsciously sexist comments made. And I, being me, raised my hand and said, what about this thing? Wasn't that sexist? And everyone was like, what are you talking about? No one even noticed that it was sexist. And Caverly came up to me and said, sister, you're totally right. It was really unacceptable. And we started bonding over realizing how in a lot of these settings, issues of sexism, first of all, they aren't even noticed, let alone are they addressed explicitly. And so
Okay,
that's,
so
I think,
I
where
have to ask
Caverly,
I have to ask a couple
yeah,
clarifying questions right here at
okay,
the start. I know I'm interrupting the narrative, but
that's all right.
just give us a sense of the sexist comment.
Well, it wasn't actually a sexist comment as much as a film was shown with a lot of sexism in it, and it wasn't commented on. So maybe I should say it wasn't a sexist comment, but the fact that this teacher said, this is my favorite film, and the film was full of sexist tropes and stereotypes, and it wasn't even commented on. And so I raised my hand and said, didn't you notice all the sexism in that film? And it's like, no, actually, I didn't. It's an old film. And so to be clear, it was the lack of commenting on sexism. But for me, as a woman, my teacher shows this film and it's full of sexism and it's not commented on. I felt belittled as a woman, that this teacher who's supposed to be about awakening wasn't even awake to all the sexist messages shown in that film that he showed. And that was really, I think, where we really bonded, where I knew this is a sister, because she started talking about her work and how she was actually combining waking up to things like sexism and racism, et cetera. Do you want to add anything to that, Caverly?
I think I'll just add, Kristin, the depth and degree to which we connect over our passions. And I agree that there's a certain fierceness to how we are committed to what we're committed to in the world. I only want to tweak slightly. I don't recall saying it's unacceptable. I didn't actually feel that it was unacceptable that it was shown. But what I want to underline is that I do agree with you. So often, especially in spiritual settings, we're not bringing attention to collective conditioning that creates suffering. And I did resonate with your recognition that was skimmed over. We both recognized this is something that could be valuable within a spiritual community to acknowledge collective conditioning that isn't very different than personal conditioning that creates suffering. Yeah.
Okay, and then to try to define a couple terms, because I want to bring everybody with us on our conversation.
Okay.
When some people hear non-dual meditation, they glaze over. I even noticed part of me, and I've interviewed a lot of non-dual teachers, and I could offer a definition of what non-dual meditation is. I noticed there's something about that phrase that just creates a strange, glazy quality. So can you define it in an easy, accessible way?
I'm going to hand that one to Caverly.
Well,
that's your job.
I love talking about Kristin and her work, and I love hearing how Kristin acknowledges me. I confess I actually don't usually use that phrase, non-dual meditation teacher. And Tami, it's for the reason you mentioned. A dear mentor of mine recently pointed out the problematic nature of even the phrase non-dual. It's pointing to something you're not. And I was being encouraged to bring a lot of attention to what I am. So I've been playing, and Kristin and I have a shared love of language. So we both we'll get into this. This is part of our shared work together, is allowing people to, through support, get in touch with language that resonates for them. And so this mentor of mine was encouraging me to lean more fully into words like wholeness, the unity of being. And so it's a bit clunky to say I teach meditations that support people in accessing the recognition of their inherent wholeness and unity of being. So I understand why non-dual is a nice way to point to the types of meditations that take us directly to an experience of who we authentically are. And I know that's where Kristin and I really bond, is we have a love of this direct access. And again, we'll get into how self-compassion plays a role in this direct access of being.
And for me, I would say what really draws me is the idea that we aren't separate from the universe. We aren't separate from the whole, right? That we are an expression of the whole. And for me, that's really what drew me in. And that's related, and we'll talk about, to my self-compassion work as well.
I'll just say one more thing, especially for those who have been hearing this phrase, non dual meditation. What does that mean? My eyes kind of glaze over. Um, a simple way to talk about it in this moment might be it's a type of meditation in which we're consciously allowing a subject object relationship to collapse or dissolve. So, just put simply, often in meditation practice, I'm showing up. I feel as though I'm focusing my attention on something. And there's this subtle distinction there that leads one to experience the sense of separation that Kristin just pointed to. So, in a non dual meditation, we're consciously allowing that to dissolve so that we can rest in the wholeness of being.
So, what I hear here at the start is that part of your bond is as two women who are going to speak out for justice and for there not being unconscious acts of harm happening in a meditation space because of an overly transcendent approach that says subject object has disappeared and we're not going to pay attention to these comments or biases that are actually creating suffering. We're going to lift them up. And I think I share that intent and ferocity. And what's interesting to me about this special episode on deepening self-compassion is how all three of us are exploring topics that really matter to our heart, and are willing to come forward with our questions. And my understanding is that part of your meeting involved, and Kristin, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you wanting to go deeper into this question about the self in self-compassion. And I'm bringing this forward because I think sometimes when people teach or they're researchers or they're big shots or whatever, and you are a big shot in the field of self-compassion. I mean, you developed the scale and the measurement and an entire training program on giving people the skills of self-compassion. It's a vulnerable thing to say. And I have this actual question about the self that's acting out these skills, but yet you led in your relationship with Caverly with this questioning mind. So I wonder if we can go into that.
Yeah, and I have to say also, Tami, what was so wonderful is being a student again, because I was teaching so much and I was teaching workshops and leading workshops and, which includes leading meditation. But just going back to a student, going back to beginner's mind was just so valuable to me. And realizing that this idea of waking up, I always heard about waking up. I always wanted to wake up. And for me, this was a way of, again, it's Caverly, she says it so much more eloquently than me, but waking up to our true nature, which is not separate from the whole, and kind of, not so much. So here's what drew me in, and see if this ties into what you're talking about, conditioning. There's the contents of our experience, which is what we're feeling and observing and experiencing. And then there's the awareness of what's happening. And in meditation, in mindfulness circles, it's usually just kind of like a almost observing awareness. But with compassion, it's a loving awareness. And I was really interested in just basically the nature of when we are experiencing the contents of our mind, that we can also, not instead of, also realize that this is an expression of loving awareness manifesting itself as these thoughts and emotions, if that makes sense. And so when it comes to conditioning, what I noticed is I also have to say, Tami, I'm going to say, if you're a single woman and you want to pick up men, go to a non-dual meditation retreat. It's crazy. If you're a man, single man, you want to pick up women, go to a self-compassion workshop. The gender difference is like 70% men in non-dual meditation retreats, 70% women in self-compassion retreats. So there's also, you know me, I'm very interested in gender roles. There's also something gendered going on here where, when it's taken it from a philosophical level, just kind of up in your head, which is maybe more traditionally masculine. I don't want to like stereotype anyone, but more traditional masculine gender role socialization. People bypass the stuff, the emotions, the thoughts. And it's like, no, I'm just awareness. I'm not the thoughts, I'm not emotions. Whereas from a compassionate point of view, it's like these thoughts and emotions hurt. They're suffering. We need to bring love and kindness to them. Right. And so that's part of, I suppose for me, what drew me into being able to experience this at a deeper level. And do you want to add on to this, Caverly? I feel like I may be missing something. Caverly knows me better than almost anyone else. She could probably finish my sentences for me.
Well, I will say it's part of the joy of working together is
Yeah.
this intimacy. And one of the things that Kristin and I also bonded over was being able to model a different way of teaching than we had experienced. But
Yes.
Kristin, I have nothing to add to what you shared. I
Okay.
appreciate hearing you speak about your experience. Thank you.
Now, you said something that I think is important, Kristin, which is several things, as well as the dating advice.
If
Which
you're
is
straight, by the way, Kristin.
Oh yeah, by the way, I'm sorry. I know so much that see, that's a great idea. So that conditioning of heterosexism, by
It's
the way,
true.
most of our conditioning is unconscious. What popped in my head was that thought conditioned by my culture. So
Yeah.
that's a beautiful example of seeing it and honoring it and owning it and
Yeah.
saying, wow, that
Look
was
how it
just
slips
such,
in. These
yeah, it
assumptions
slips
we
in
make.
with these assumptions of heterosexism and yeah, and I can kind of feel the pain of that instead of being defensive because I didn't choose to have that unconscious conditioning that rose up. And it really was a heterosexist statement. It was kind of funny, but it was also a heterosexist statement. And instead of like judging myself for it, I can just, this is just part of what's unfolding. I can have compassion for that. Of course, we all are a product of how we've been conditioned. If we bring loving awareness to this with compassion as opposed to blame and shame, then that's really what we're after. So that was actually a real-time example of how we can use self-compassion and this understanding of, that we are awareness unfolding and what arises is the product of our conditioning. And we can bring compassion to that as well as just an observation in a way that's transformative,
Which brings me to one of my many questions about deepening self-compassion, which is a place, this transcendent place. It can just be witnessing or it can be a loving. So one of my questions is how in both of your experiences has this loving nature of observation been discovered? Because I think one of the things, and just to say, is that I don't think it's an add-on. I think it's intrinsic in awareness, but that it's not always something that people are in touch with. So I'm curious to know how you both became more in touch with the loving nature of awareness.
Do you want to respond to that first, Caverly?
Sure. At the monastery where I trained, my teacher used to refer to awareness as conscious, compassionate awareness. And I used to wonder why so many words? Why not just awareness? And I understand now something experientially that I only understood intellectually as a monk. And that is that awareness only seems like a cold, neutral witness if we're accessing awareness through a place that's not embodied, through an experience that is not embodied. So perhaps an intellectual understanding of awareness. My teacher, when I was trained to facilitate retreats that we called Nothing is Wrong with You retreats, There's Nothing Wrong with You was the title of the retreat. I was trained as a facilitator to recognize we would do role plays in which people experience negative self-talk. And I was trained as a facilitator to be able to recognize that it was more important to have the retreatant move into the position of being the one offering the reassurances to the part that had experienced all that negative self-talk than it was to simply receive the reassurances. And I'm able to see now that it's because self-compassion as a practice is like a lifeboat. And this is one of the things I've loved about what Kristin has so masterfully done with her work. I remember the first time we were teaching together, and I had that image of it's like a boat that takes us out of our conditioning. And that when we step into the role, when we embody conscious, compassionate awareness, we're able to offer loving reassurances to the part of us that's suffering, including the part of us that assumed we were separate, including to this felt sense of separate self that we've suffered on behalf of. So it's not a neutral place. It's when we directly experience it, we realize that there is a the word love, in my experience, could be interchangeable with the word awareness, just depending on the circumstance and the moment I'm in, regarding which word I would reach for.
And for me, it's almost like a two-part process. At first, it's very useful to realize I am not the same. I'm not identical or identified with the thoughts or emotions or sensations I'm having. And so sometimes when you make that separation, it just feels a little bit more like awareness. I am not what's happening. I am aware of what's happening, and that's useful. But when it's not integrated, it can feel a little bit cold or neutral. But when this awareness turns towards what's happening, and when what's happening is suffering, it just naturally, like it, this is my own experience. It feels like a mother holding her crying child, right? When you embody this loving awareness, you are turning toward what's happening as opposed to just saying, oh, I'm not what's happening. And I think, and again, I don't know, I was just on a non-dual meditation retreat 3 weeks ago, and the teacher kept on talking about awareness. And I said, can we say loving awareness? And I cannot tell you how many people came up to me and said, that made so much difference. And it's because I think awareness is a little bit disconnected, a little disembodied, the way Caverly said. But loving awareness is when we are both what's happening and the awareness of what's happening. If we're the awareness and not what was happening, we'd be separate. That's why they call it non-duality, not two, right? It's not the same, but it's not separate either. And that connectedness, Tami, my 3 components of self-compassion, which have worked out pretty well, the warmth, the kindness, the mindful awareness, and that common humanity, which really points to more than just humanity, connection with the entire universe. That's really what we're tapping into when we're waking up. And that's also the exact way that I define what self-compassion is. So we're going to the same place. Or I shouldn't say we're going to the same place. We're realizing the same truth. That's probably better language. Yeah.
When I think of you as raising your hand in these meditation retreats, I think, God, did they really let her back into the next retreat? I mean,
she's a troublemaker, Tami. You can feel it.
I'm in trouble. Every retreat, I raise my hand because there's usually something that, like one person said, oh yeah, loving awareness comes at the very last stage. And I said, why? Why doesn't it come in earlier? And he actually said, well, maybe you just aren't there yet. And I almost left. But you encounter, I think there's a lot of unconsciousness among some teachers, especially those who've been socialized to just think that they're right and this way of doing things is the right way. And there's sometimes a lack of questioning, I think, that comes from privilege and power, that in some ways being a woman, of course we have privilege from being white, but from being a woman, you realize, is that necessarily true? Shouldn't we be questioning these orthodoxies? And so I think that's part of what Caverly and I bring to this. There aren't a lot of women in this space, I'm telling you.
And I want
Tami, it's
to
true.
underscore a question, which is, it sounds like what you're saying, and I want to see if I have this right, is that when we're working at a more intellectual or mental level, there's this sense of pure observation, but that when we enter an embodied space, and specifically, I would say the space of the heart, when we're
Yes.
in a heart space, then this observational quality becomes loving or conscious, compassionate awareness. And that you're saying from a gendered perspective that more often women are starting, and I'm saying these are generalizations, which always make me
Of
nervous about
course.
any gendered
Yeah.
statement, but that women have this embodied, heart-based way of being one with all that is. And that has this loving quality there, potentially right from the jump, right from the start, right at the beginning. It's a loving kind of embrace of everything, even the suffering parts that feel separate.
And just want to clarify here, we aren't talking about biological sex. We're talking about gender role socialization. We aren't even talking about gender identity. It's how we were raised, what things we were allowed to feel or what things were bullied out of us, right? And I think that's part of what's playing here. And I talked about this in my book, Fierce Self-Compassion, is that sometimes we're socialized to feel uncomfortable with certain things. And I think that's why general socialization, which Caverly calls our conditioning, all those factors, all those biases that kind of that operate unconsciously, are filtering our experience. And what Caverly and I are very dedicated to is looking at those filters. How are they operating? How are they potentially limiting us? And so it's beautiful how all these threads come together when we bring this idea of loving awareness to. Caverly, are you comfortable with me saying the practice of waking up?
Sure, Tami.
Okay.
As you're hearing, Kristin and I have this ongoing love of language, and there is
Yeah.
something to be said about how what we're describing is also a non-practice. It's not something that
Yes.
we have to work really hard and get
Yes.
better at. But
Yeah.
what I want to, Kristin, is your thought complete? Because I had something I'd like to say, but I don't
Yes,
want to
it
cut you
is.
off. So
Yes.
I do think, Tami, I'm in total agreement about the framing. And as an interviewer, you're so good at zooming out and seeing like, okay, how can I put in a nutshell what we're really talking about here? And the only thing I'd like to contribute is that something that, correct me if I'm wrong, Tami, but I think the three of us have a lot of care around is the both and. So all three of us have direct experiences that there is no gender. All three of us have direct experiences that we are not our bodies. And we live on this relative plane in which, as Kristin just was referring back to, we have this collective conditioning that makes it such that our relative experiences are different. And one of the things that I think is important about acknowledging this is ultimately what we're talking about, we're just tossing names towards the nameless. Loving, giving the word love is simply bringing a word to what actually is wordless. And I think there's value in, as we bring words to the wordless, in recognizing how we're impacted by the words we choose. So many people throughout my years of leading meditation retreats will tell me they'd been training for years and years and years and had that sort of the farthest they went in practice. Again, I'm intentionally making this sound like a line, and it's not, of course, but their felt experience was, the farther I went in practice, the more entrenched I got in identifying as the witness of my experience. And there was a coolness to it. There was a neutrality to it. I can't say that I actually had increased compassion for the different parts of me who suffered. I can't say that I watched my childhood trauma begin to be healed through this practice. I just sort of hovered above my experience. And that was only able to be named once they had a different experience, which is why Kristin and I think, have such a passion around these self-compassion practices. Because when we become that which can see these, let's say, difficult experiences from our childhood through the seat, from the seat of love with a capital L, then real healing can occur. That which has perceived itself as harmed and broken and separate can be rightfully ushered into the home of being, in which what's experienced is that we were never broken and that in fact we are unbreakable. But to just say those things from a non-embodied place is a type of bypassing. I would never say to someone who had a really hard childhood, you're actually just unbroken. In that moment, that person feels broken. What is the lifeboat to bring them home? It's self-compassion. It's what Kristin's work has been so dedicated to. It's what in Peace in Schools has been the most profound aspect of our curriculum. Teenagers being able to recognize, I can apply unconditionally loving reassurances as a practice. I can offer these reassurances to the part of me who's suffering, and I can usher them to the home of being and into, as you said, Tami, into the heart.
I want to make sure that there's a connecting link here that's more explicit, because I think in many people's experience, they can rest back in a kind of loving awareness at different moments during their day. But then something happens and there's a sense of, I feel horrible about this, I'm upset, I made a mistake, I said the wrong thing, whatever, something. And these two aspects of their experience don't connect. That sense of being the loving awareness and the suffering self feel like they're in separate screens. There isn't any cord, there's no lifeboat really. They're just separate channels. How do you both make that connection, and how can you help people make that connection?
Well, so Tami, that is what self-compassion is, precisely. Self-compassion is that lifeboat. And so more and more over the years, I've really been seeing self-compassion not just as a series of practices. It's not just being kind to yourself and remembering you are only human. What it actually is a perspective shift. So normally when you make that mistake or that thought comes up or you feel inadequate or there's that stressful moment, we get absorbed in the thoughts and the feelings and the difficult sensations. And we get really locked into a sense of separate self. And that self feels small, it feels inadequate, it feels sometimes hopeless, right? Fatally flawed. And the moment you give compassion, you're actually, the word self-compassion, the self is the one that suffers, that feeling of separation, inadequacy, not good enough. When you move into compassion, you're no longer identifying with the separate self. You're the one who gives compassion, right? So when you're in a state of compassion, first of all, you've taken a step away from identifying with the suffering limited self. You've moved into, and Caverly and I love to play with this on our retreats. We have people come up with their own names for it. It might be loving awareness. It might be your soul. It might be your big self. It might be, your higher self. People have different terms for it. And it's interesting. Everyone has a sense of what we're pointing to, even if they use very different terms for it. When you embody compassion, then you're no longer just that small, limited, separate self. But here's the thing. You are aiming, your focus is still on the pain. That's why it's self-compassion and not just like going into loving awareness. You're aiming it toward the pain. The words you're saying, like, I'm so sorry you're feeling this way. How can I help? I care about you. It's going to be okay. I will not abandon you. all these reassurances we give from the perspective of compassion mean we aren't leaving behind the suffering small self. We're both. We are both loving awareness and the suffering self at the same time. And so what's amazing is every moment, I would say every moment, it's an extreme statement, but I'm going to say it. Every moment of self-compassion is a moment of being awake at some level. Every moment of self-compassion is a moment of letting go of our identification with that small, separate, limited, inadequate self and moving into something bigger, more connected, and more heartful, full of love.
Something that I appreciate about the work that Kristin and I have been doing together is this support that we provide for recognizing that this movement that Kristin's referring to can be a chosen movement. It's very empowering for people to recognize not only I'll derail myself here and just insert something that feels important. When I first came to self-compassion practices, I can say that I felt like a small sense of separate self practicing, offering self-compassion to another part of me that was hurting. So I think the place that is exciting about what Kristin and I have been creating together is that there are pathways for someone not only to practice something that helps a part of them that might be suffering, but Kristin and I have felt quite aligned around recognizing that through these practices, we can remember who we really are versus staying identified with some other aspect of the personality that's simply showering another aspect of the personality with compassion. And Kristin, I think that's why what you're saying is so important. It's that and this is the lifeboat piece, we become the recognition that there are no separate parts, or as Dick Short says, there are no bad parts. Everything is welcomed in experience. And conscious compassionate awareness or loving awareness or big self naturally knows this, is this. So we're resting into that knowing in an embodied way.
Okay, let me see if I can ask you to clarify, Caverly and Kristin, because I think that many people, when they learn the skills of self-compassion, and Kristin, in the way that you and Dr. Chris Germer describe them in your mindful self-compassion training as a set of skills, do have the experience of there being this loving part of themselves and the suffering part of themselves, and the loving part is practicing the skills on the suffering part, but they're not connecting and dissolving into the source of compassion. It's not a waking up moment, but it is a really good Band-Aid for a painful experience. So how do you both teach people to make it and inquire into it as an awakening experience?
Yeah, which is so, and it's true, Tami. So I was a little mischievous when I said
I know you're
moment of
mischievous. That's
self-compassion
okay.
is a moment of waking up. It's one step there, but this is what Caverly and I have been teaching these retreats called, finding the source of compassion, where this is what's so beautiful when we combine more maybe classic self-compassion skills training with really looking deeply at where is this love and compassion coming from. And so when they're being helped, especially with, Caverly's teaching, help to embody the loving, connected presence, which, by the way, is a way to describe the three components of self-compassion: loving, connected presence. Well, that loving, connected presence isn't limited. It's not separate. It's not so much learning a new skill as it is just, expressing its true nature. And so here's the thing. You don't have to go this route. You can practice self-compassion just fine without even thinking about any of this, and it still works. It still helps. It still helps to reduce your suffering. But you can go farther. You can actually use it as a lifeboat, so to speak, to something much bigger, much deeper, much more profound. It can really be a way of understanding your true nature, who we really are. If you're interested. If you aren't, you don't have to be. But I think a lot of people are. I mean, this is what's really surprised me about working with Caverly. We've had people come to our retreats who've never even been on a meditation retreat before. They just wanted self-compassion training, and they have incredibly profound experiences. Because I think everyone has those moments in life where they do connect with something bigger. Whether it's when they see their child for the first time or they're on the top of a mountain out in nature. Again, everyone has their own language for it. So we're just kind of helping them connect the dots that that's actually what you're doing. You're tapping into, well, as Dick Shorts would say, yourself with a capital S, right? So it's less exotic than I thought it would be necessarily. People understand, they have some experience of this that they can connect to.
Well, I think this is the moment where we're going to take people into an experience, because it's one thing to hear us talk about it, but we need to do it. We need to actually taste the meal. And so, Caverly, I wonder, not a long meditation, but you're gifted at getting right to it quickly.
Yes.
For that person who experiences some loving part of them, sending love to some suffering part of them, but is not in a quote unquote awake, loving, conscious presence. They're not there. They're in these two parts. Can you help us? Can you help us take this discovery further?
Yeah. So in other words, Tami, you recognize your suffering, and it feels really hard to access this sort of vastness of our being. It feels difficult to access the vastness of I am, or true nature, or big S self. So kind of what do we do in those moments?
Yeah. Take us
Great.
into an experience of that, to have what Kristin has stated so strongly, that a moment of deep self-compassion is a waking up moment.
Okay, beautiful. So I want to invite our listeners to pause and begin by feeling your feet. Whether you're feeling your feet on the floor or you're cross-legged, let the soles of your feet be the point in which you can experience some connection with the earth, with the grounding of a planet that holds us and isn't separate from us. We could maybe even say loves us. We are not separate from nature. We are nature. Take a moment to feel yourself connecting to the earth and potentially as the earth. Part of. Whole. And then let your breath nourish you. So take 3 of the longest and deepest inhalations and exhalations you've taken yet today. And for a moment, just out of play, imagine that your breath loved you. We so rarely pause to enjoy the breath. Just enjoy this breath that, if your mind is saying, how could the breath love me? Just recognize it's sustaining you the way a mother sustains a child. So feel this loving breath move in and out of your body. And then, friends, take a moment to see any part of you that might be struggling or full of angst, strain, suffering in any way in this moment. Just see them having whatever experience they're having. And then bring loving, gentle attention to the lens you're looking through. Is there any self-talk like they shouldn't be having that experience, or what's wrong with them, or they should get over it? Just notice, who am I identified with right now? Am I the judge? Am I identified with some version of the inner critic? Or, in a sense, what's my position? Now, in this moment, can you bring non-judgmental, loving inquiry to this position? What is this position? Is it solid? Is it fixed? Does it have edges? Is it just a bunch of thought forms? In this very moment, rather than continuing to stand in, I am this position, ask, what is all this arising in? So all these thought forms, all these emotions, whatever stance might be present, let yourself feel the way in which it's not separate from the loving breath of being. Give yourself permission to soften into the ease of being. Take a stance as presence itself. It's a stanceless stance. You don't have to fix any part of you. Nobody needs to get better or evolve or change or even heal. Let yourself rest in the perfection of being that experiences the perfection of what arises, even the perfection of conditioned processes that veil the vastness of being. You are whole. And now, if it's alive for you, playfully take on the role of the compassionate mentor and look to see from this stanceless stance of presence, is there anything you'd want to say or offer to any part of you that's been suffering or struggling? Maybe it's something as simple as, I see you. But we'll close this brief meditation out with the opportunity to look to see whether there's any phrase or reassurance, unconditionally loving reassurance that you want to take with you, that you can apply as a practice in your life the next time this part of you who's suffering is up. Maybe it's I love you. Maybe it's you're not alone. And we'll close out with this opportunity to offer that in this moment to whoever and to whatever needs to hear it. Thank you.
Thank you, Caverly. And thanks, everybody, for taking that journey with us. I'm very moved by the phrase that you've both referenced, which is compassion as a lifeboat. And there's a question that comes up for me in that, which is I've found in my own experience that sometimes I need another person to help me get on the boat. Like I just can't get on the boat by myself. I try, but somehow I'm not going. And, I've been to plenty of meditation retreats and I know how to meditate. And Kristin, I've studied the skills that you teach and I can even recount for you what they are. But then there are these moments in my life when I need another human being. I just need a friend, a mentor, a person to say, let me give you a hand. I'm going to get on the lifeboat with you. And I wonder if you can talk about that, because I feel fortunate that I've had a lot of people reach their hands out to me and say, I'm here for you. I'll help you get on the boat. But sometimes I feel like, really, Tami, after all these years, you still need that? But I do. Actually, I do.
Yeah. Well, these practices, it's kind of ironic because self-compassion, in one point of view, it's instead of just me giving compassion to others or others giving compassion to me, I'm giving compassion to myself. So it can seem as if you don't need anyone else, right? But of course, it helps so much to have that relational stance because compassion is by its nature relational. And if I put my little scientist hat on for a moment, it's because it evolved that way, right? The feelings of compassion and care as embodied beings, as human beings, as mammals, the feelings of compassion evolved so that we take care of our family members and close in-group members. So our nervous system is actually designed by evolution to have a compassion arise relationally. So what we're saying here, it's not like the only way it can arise, and that's important because sometimes at 3 a.m. that other person isn't there, and we don't want to be totally dependent on another physical human being. But our nervous system really responds so much more easily when we have that contact with someone else in a relational way. Absolutely, we don't want to deny that or minimize that.
I really appreciate hearing you say that and the biological roots of it, because of course, part of what I'm moved by is your friendship, the friendship that the two of you have. And also, Caverly, I'm reflecting on a moment you and I had the chance to have dinner together not that long ago. And I was sharing with you something about some suffering part of me. And you leaned in at the dinner table and your eyes welled up with tears as you were listening to me. And in many ways, that was the greatest gift of the dinner, was I felt how much you felt what I was saying. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, that in and of itself got me on the lifeboat because I could see it in your eyes. And I'm emphasizing this because I think it's something that we can offer each other, this kind of loving, compassionate, knowing presence, which is that hand into the lifeboat to each other?
Tami, it's one of my greatest passions in this moment. As I'm sure you have heard Thich Nhat Hanh's phrase, the next Buddha may be a Sangha. And one of the reasons in my own work, I've been focusing a lot on what I've been referring to as relational Dharma. Not that I coined the phrase, but I do, there is a specific way I've been leaning into it that has to do with realizing freedom together. And I believe that relationship is not only a valuable place for practice, but in this moment in time, a critical place for practice. How can we not only recognize that we're all one, but honor the appearances of separation in which we are relating to each other? So ultimately, I love that phrase, love is the collapse of relationship, because in the collapse of relationship, we feel our shared being. And Tami, in my experience, that's what's happening in those moments. I did not feel separate from you. I was you. You were me. And it's true, Kristin and I easily can drop into this shared recognition together because we share a love of shared being, and to be in spaces where we can create fields in which others are welcome into a direct experience of shared being is what collective awakening is all about. So I'm a big fan of retreats that are relational in nature. There's space for silence, but there's also space for intimacy, space for exercises that are guided in which we're really seeing each other and also experiencing that there is no other. So I appreciate you underscoring the value of this in this time. And I think, as Kristin pointed out for us at the beginning, this is part of an approach which I think goes against a very patriarchal model that suggests that there's going to be someone at the front of the room that knows all the answers and will just dish out wisdom. What we're talking about now is collective wisdom, collective understanding, collective realization, and collective awakening.
Very important, very well said, very pointed at this time. And with that, how can people who are interested in studying with both of you go further? I'd love to hear from each of you what the opportunities are.
So each of us teach separately and together. So when I teach on my own, I tend to be more standard, using more from my psychologist lens. I mean, there's always some of this spirituality built into it, but I don't get to talk about it as much. But if you just want the basics, kind of the skills building, if you go to selfcompassion.org, I teach workshops. And Caverly, she can talk about what she does. But so 2 or 3 times a year, we do teach together. We're teaching at Spirit Rock in March, is it, Caverly?
Yes, we're teaching in March there.
And then inside LA, we're teaching together a weekend where we are bringing this together. It's I can't even tell you how satisfying it is for me, Tami. I might talk about some of the concepts, and then Caverly will drop people into that space of shared loving awareness. It's so beautiful to mix the two. So we are doing that regularly. Yeah.
It's true. In our last retreat, we just led a retreat in December at the Whitby Institute, and the testimonials, the evaluations, almost all of them have some version of appreciating the science portal in that Kristin brings that I am deeply unskilled and have very little experience with, and then just the balance of our energies. And so, as Kristin said, we enjoy teaching together. We have several opportunities in 2026 to be with us. And then I'm offering a lot of retreats and practices on my own. And because you mentioned at the beginning, Tami, my book, The Heart of Who We Are, Realizing Freedom Together, which is, as you know, through Sounds True, I will be doing a practice collective. This will be my third time the book has practices that are designed for personal application, but in the book they're applied collectively. And then, so for me, it's rewarding to have a third go at moving a collective through the book. And if I think this podcast will likely air in February, I'm told. So if the Practice Collective has just started, it won't be too late to join. Just to say that. So thank you, Tami, for the opportunity to mention that.
And I'd like to end on the note of inviting all of the people who are listening at whatever point in time you're listening to this to join this shared heart field right here. The two of you in your friendship birthed, I think, a loving, welcoming field together, invited me in, and now in that we're inviting everyone in who's listening. The gates are open. The love is here for us to swim in together and then to bring forth our compassionate mentorship for each other. So thank you both. I'm great admirers and so happy that you're teaching together. Thanks, friends. Thanks for being with us.
Tami,
Thanks,
thank
Tami.
you. Thank you, Kristin.